So there will be, obviously, see, weathering will depend on numerous factors. Not everything will be similar in weathering. For example, if I am keeping if there are two kind of rocks in my hand, one of the rock is a basalt rock, while the other rock is maybe a granite rock. These are the two different kinds of rocks I am carrying. Now if I keep this rock in the air and expose it to the wind action or expose it to the water action, the granite rock is kind of an crystalline rock, kind of a large crystals. So some crystals are dark in color, some crystals are white in color. And on the other hand, the basalt is very fine crystals. Most of them are dark in color. So that means there are different types of crystals in the granite. The darker color crystals of the granite will absorb more amount of sunlight, will expand more as compared to the lighter color crystals. This will result into differential expansion and contraction of the different types of crystals in the granite. And as a result of this, the granite, the darker crystals will start falling away from the granite, resulting into what we can say weathering of the granite. It won't affect basalt much because most of the crystals are, first thing, the crystals are very minute, and second, most of the crystals are lighter in color. Now if I keep both these rocks in the water, I will see that here in the water the basalt will be affected more as compared to that of a granite. That means the chemical composition of a rock, that is basalt, is more having different minerals as compared to the granite. Or even if you are confused between two, take for example basalt, granite, and one more rock, that is chalk, or your limestone, or your simple chalk. Now if I keep all these three in the water at the same time, which one will be the first to be weathered away, to become soluble or to become weak rock? It will be chalk. Chalk will be disintegrated, decomposed inside the water. Granite, after that the basalt, and least affected will be the granite. That means because the chalk is a sedimentary rock having different type of a chemical composition as compared to basalt, which is an extrusive igneous rock, as compared to the granite. So one of the first major factor affecting the erosion is the composition and the texture of the rock. So we can write as the composition and the structure of the rock. Composition and the structure of the rocks. Now what do you mean by the structure of the rocks? Again, you take an example of the two rocks, well jointed, this rounded rock, and take for example a jointed rocks having joints in between. Now if there is any kind of a physical weathering of these two rocks, this rock being more of a compact rock, it is consider this as a very, very compact rock as compared to the other rock, the second rock here, as a well jointed rock. Over the process period of time, these joints in this rock will keep on expanding, and as a result the rock will be weathered away and broken down into big annular fragments. So we will get a new rock which is having which will look somewhat like this, that the rock will be broken down into different type of fragments. On the other hand, not much will be affected to this rock, or even if it breaks down, it will break down in different shapes. So this is how the structure of the rocks is affected. So composition means what chemically it is made up of, structure of the rocks, how it is the structure. So what we can try to hear with the examples which can help you in both the preliminary point of view and which you can quote in the main examination, is that the limestone rocks, for example here in the composition we can write the limestone rocks are easily affected by chemical weathering are easily affected by chemical weathering. Limestone rocks are easily affected by chemical weathering. What we can write in the structure? Example is well-jointed rock, which I have shown you in the diagram now. Well-jointed rocks are more affected by mechanical weathering. Are more affected by mechanical weathering. The third is compact rocks. Compact rocks are resistant to both physical and chemical weathering. So composition and the structure of the rocks, for example, limestone rocks are easily affected by chemical weathering, well-jointed rocks are more affected by mechanical weathering, compact rocks are resistant to both physical and chemical weathering. This is how the composition and the structures of the rock will affect the weathering. Now the second, one of the more important factors here is, or in fact you can say it is one of the most important factor in the process of weathering, is the climatic variations. Is the climatic variations of the rocks. Now how do the climatic variations affect? Take an example, what the climate in the desert region. For a climate in the desert region, now there is a property of a limestone rock that it is more resistant to a physical weathering, that is when when there is no weathering involving water as compared to when there is a weathering involving the water. So if you put the limestone rock in the desert region, it is a very, very strong rock which does not undergo any kind of a weathering. But if we put the same rock in the hot and humid regions or in the regions of very heavy rainfall, then it becomes a very, very weak rock. Second, the climatic variations also determine the rate of weathering. Example, in the desert region, during the daytime, there is very, very hot temperature. During the night time, the temperature drops suddenly. So during the daytime, the rocks expand, and during the night time, the rocks contract. And as a result, there is a stress in the rocks, and as a result the cracks are formed in the rocks. I am drawing a very rough diagram because this is what we are going to do later on. Alternate expansion and contraction of which layers? Mostly the outer layers, because obviously the outer layers are receiving more heat and they are giving away more heat during the night time, that is, they are becoming more cold. The inner rock it is not water that the sun rays can penetrate deep inside, it is a solid thing, so the sun rays affect mostly the outer surface. So this alternate expansion and contraction sets up the stress in the rocks, and as a result the rocks break in the desert region. On the other hand, even in the monsoon climate like India, during the hot season the rock expands because there is too much expansion of the rocks. And during the cold season, during the rainy time, suddenly rain comes and the rock cools, and therefore it contracts, resulting into the stress being set up in the rock. If you want to see this, don't try this at home, but this is a common general knowledge. If you put too much hot water suddenly on the cold glass, there is a cracks come in the glass or the glass can break. That is if the glass is thin and if there is a sudden variation in the temperature of the liquid you are putting in the glass, and there the glass can undergo crack. What is this? This is nothing but a weathering. So the climatic variations have more effect. Now, the chemical weathering is a weathering which involves water. So can we say that the chemical weathering is nearly absent in the desert regions? The desert regions where the wind is one of the major factors, the mechanical weathering dominates in the desert region. Can we say this? Is there water in the desert? What is a desert? Desert is a region where there is no water. So we can say the climatic variations may that the mechanical weathering dominates in the arid or desert regions, while chemical weathering is one of the most important source of weathering. It is one of the most important form of weathering in hot and humid regions. One of the hot and humid region is our country, India. So we can say in India, chemical weathering is a dominant process of weathering. But when does our country become hot and humid? All the times of the year? Unless you are living in Chennai, unless you are living in Mumbai, that is the coastal regions of India, India has climate. India has some kind of, even in those cities, but the variation is not that great. So we can say that in India there is a dry season, that is the non-rainy season, there is a rainy season. In India there is a winter season which is cold and dry. So here in the cold and dry winter season there is not much air also, so not much weathering occurs. But during the summer season there is too much heat focusing on the rocks break due to too much heat. And especially in the seasons of May, June, too much heat causes thunderstorms, what we call as Andhi, Tufan. In Hindi, thunderstorms come and they give sudden rainfall causing the rocks to break. So we can say physical weathering dominates in India during the dry season, but during the rainy season when the temperature is hot and humid, it's hot and humid, we'll understand that again in the climatology, the chemical weathering dominates. So one of the most important factor which affects the weathering is climatic variation. Now consider too, now consider the topmost layer of the world, that is the tundra climatic region, in the region which is covered by ice throughout the year. Because these are covered by ice throughout the year, they are not affected by the process of weathering. So these are the tropical regions of the world, hot and humid regions. These are the temperate regions of the world. While these are the polar regions of the world. Now if the question is, in which of the following three regions will chemical weathering dominate? Will it be in the polar region, will it be in the tropical region, or in the temperate region? What is the tropical region? It is a region with hot and humid climate. So chemical weathering is a process which is dominant in hot and humid climate. So we can say that in the hot and humid climate, chemical weathering dominates. If the climate is hot and humid, it is the chemical weathering which dominates. If the climate is dry, hot desert regions, obviously deserts are dry only, then which will be the weathering dominating? Mechanical weathering will dominate. mechanical weathering dominates in the arid and the semi-arid region of the world. In the arid and the semi-arid region of the world. In the polar regions, that is regions which are covered under ice, by ice, both chemical and mechanical weathering is least or minimum, both chemical or mechanical weathering is minimum in these regions. In the hot and humid region, one of the most important process of weathering is the process of leaching. Now what is this process? Due to very sudden rainfall, all major nutrients from the soil which can be dissolved in water are washed away from the top layer of the soil. And as a result of this, the soil, which is rich only in iron and aluminium, remains, while all other nutrients, all other major minerals from the soil are removed, and the soil only rich in iron and aluminium remains. It occurs in the region of very heavy rainfall. So this is the process where the nutrients which causes the removal of nutrients from the soil. This process is known as leaching. Now in India, which are the regions of very heavy rainfall? See, I am not drawing it here because we will be again coming to this process. So in the areas of India, the lateritic soil which is found in the Western Ghat region, that is the regions in this region, and the northeastern plateau region, these are the two regions which receive very heavy rainfall in India. One is this entire region and the other is the northeastern region. These are the two areas which result in which there is a leaching of the soil. Now leaching means removal of nutrients. So it results into the formation of a soil which is known as lateritic soil. Which is reddish in color due to the dominance of iron, which is red in color due to the presence of iron, and which is not a fertile soil. So it is used mostly for building bricks, and hence it is known as lateritic soil. Hence it is known as lateritic soil. So climatic variation. Now when we come to the process of India, we can say in India, what will be the kind of or we can say what will be the kind of variations? In India, during hot and dry summer, mechanical weathering will dominate. While during the rainy season, chemical weathering dominates. Chemical weathering dominates. So in India we can see the seasonal variation in the weathering. During hot and dry summer, mechanical weathering will dominate, while during the rainy season, during the wet monsoon season, chemical weathering dominates. Now how can the question be implied? If they ask you the implied question, that is, what will be the major form of weathering in the state of Rajasthan? Chemical weathering, biochemical weathering, mechanical weathering, no weathering. Rajasthan comes in which region? Hot and dry region. So the mechanical weathering dominates in the Rajasthan. On the other hand, if the question comes entire northeastern states, Kerala, coastal region of West India, that is the entire Western Ghat region, which weathering will dominate? The weathering dominating will be chemical weathering during the rainy season. So depending upon the area where the question can be asked, so use your knowledge, apply this knowledge, try to interrelate your knowledge with the different kind of, that is, try to interrelate your knowledge, and that is hot and dry weathering. If that is in the hot and dry regions, mechanical weathering dominates. So all the major deserts of the world will have mechanical weathering. All the equatorial regions of the world will have chemical weathering. The third factor which affects the weathering is nature of a ground slope. The nature of a ground slope. Now how does the nature of a ground slope affects the weathering? Very simple. If the ground slope is gentle, if the ground is flat, if the ground slope is gentle, on the other hand, if the ground slope is very, very steep. Now which area will see the maximum amount of weathering? If the rock material here gets weathered, it will stay on the ground. In fact, this will keep on collecting on the ground, and it will protect the lower rock from the weathering, because the slope is so flat that there is no movement. Because in weathering, you remember, there is no movement of the rocks. It's only in the erosion when there is an agent of erosion involved. So the weathered rock will in fact collect on the top layer, and it will protect the lower layer of the soil. On the other hand, in the gentle areas of a gentle slope, the rock will gently slow downwards. As a result, the weathering will be slow in this region. On the other hand, if the rock is here in the areas of the steep slope, the weathered materials will very fastly move downwards, resulting into it will expose the new area for further weathering. So here minimal weathering, in fact we can say the weathered material protects protects lower rocks from further weathering. Here, gentle weathering in the areas of a gentle slope, moderate weathering in the areas of a steep slope. There will be moderate weathering. And in the areas of extremely steep slope, the weathered materials instantly move. The weathered materials here will instantly move downwards. instantly moves downwards. As a result of it, new rocks are exposed, and therefore there is a heavy weathering in, or we can say therefore in this region there is an heavy amount of weathering or more weathering. There is a more weathering. So can we use these statements in the areas of a gentle over a flat slope? There will be minimum weathering, while the weathering will be very high in the areas of the steep slope. So this is the third factor which affects the weathering. You just have a look at the diagram. Then the fourth factor which affects the weathering is flora and fauna of the region. And fauna. Now how does the plant, in fact it is said that is planting more and more plants is very good. So it is good for the soil also. In fact we ask for more planting of more plants during the process of, to stop the process of a soil erosion. Then how does the soil flora or the plants affect the weathering? See, if we look at this diagram, the plant, the tree which is here, it goes into the ground surface and it breaks the ground so that its roots are formed. So when it goes deep inside the ground surface, obviously the rocks here are broken, and as a result of this, due to the roots, and as a result of this, the weathering process occurs. When we walk on the ground surface, the smaller rocks are further broken, or they are weakened, and over the period of time they will be broken, resulting into the process of weathering. So the flora, we can say, or the plants, is both beneficial, that is, it is the protector of the weathering, as well as it is one of the causes of the weathering. So the four factors which affect the weathering: we can say the dense vegetation, in fact, is cause of weathering, as well as protects the weathering. How will it protect the weathering? In the areas of dense trees, there will be less and less amount of insolation or the sunlight which will reach the rock surface. The wind speed will be reduced, and as a result it protects the weathering, but also it is one of the cause of weathering by breaking the rocks during the formation of roots, etc. So the main factors affecting the weathering are composition and the structure of the rocks, then the climatic variation, then the nature of a ground slope, and the types of, and both the flora and fauna. In fact, man is one of the agent which is causing very fast amount of weathering. Now the types of the weathering. Weathering can be same like, just like the earlier topic, weathering can be briefly divided into, based on the types of weathering. We can divide the weathering into mechanical weathering, chemical weathering, and biological weathering. And biological weathering. What will be the basic difference here? By your previous knowledge, physical breakdown of the rock, disintegration of the rock will be mechanical weathering. Decomposition of a rock will be, that is sarjana, decomposition, rusting of the rocks due to reaction with the water will be chemical weathering. And biological is the weathering due to living beings, due to animals and plants will be biological weathering. Where the weathering which is caused due to plants and animals will be an biological weathering. See, the physical weathering can be caused due to water, can be caused due to ice, can be caused due to temperature, and can be caused due to both wind. So what will be the agents of mechanical or physical weathering? Now we'll study the mechanical weathering or the physical weathering in detail. The mechanical weathering is the breaking down or the disintegration of the rocks or breakdown of the rocks. So we can say it is the physical disintegration or breakdown of the rocks due to different factors such as water, such as wind, such as frost, such as insolation, may be due to different factors. So basically we'll be studying the 4 different types of physical weathering. So physical weathering is due to the disintegration of the rocks. Now the 4 different types of physical weathering is block disintegration, due to frost action, block disintegration of the rocks due to temperature changes, exfoliation of the rocks, exfoliation or onion peeling, exfoliation or onion weathering, and lastly granular disintegration. Granular disintegration. So the 4 major types of mechanical weathering. Now see how to block disintegration. It can be caused due to frost action, it can be caused due to temperature changes. Shattering of the rocks can be also caused due to rainwater. Exfoliation is a kind of a weathering, very special kind of a weathering we'll see in the circular rocks and the granular disintegration. Now first I will explain you how the frost action, how the breakdown of the rocks occurs due to the frost action. See, this is a special kind of a weathering in the areas which have alternate during the daytime, where there is a water collects in the gaps in the areas of a cold climate. So in this region, during the daytime, when the temperature is high, water melts. But during the night time, when the temperature falls very below the freezing point, the water gets solidified, or it gets converted into or it is freezed into the ice. So this alternate freeze during the night time, during the daytime, freeze-thaw action of water results into expansion of the crevices, or we can say joints in the rock. So joints in the rocks are expanded, so we can say that this is a kind of a weathering which affects the well-jointed rock in an cold region. So if we want to draw the diagram, we can show it like this. In the areas of extremely, we can say in the areas of the cold climates, if this is a rock structure, it is having a well-jointed rock, or if this is a rock structure, during the daytime, during the daytime, water will collect in this. During the night time, this water gets converted into ice. When the water gets converted into ice, there is an expansion in the volume of the water, and as a result, because of expansion, there is an expansion of this crack. So over the period of time, this crack will get expanded. And further expansion of this crack will result into breaking down of the rocks. That is what we call as an physical weathering. That is, it will break down as large blocks of rock. So what will be the fourth process? The fourth process here will be the rocks will break down into two different types of structures. So these are the three kind of process. So initially one single rock, there was a small joint in the rock in which water got collected during the rainy season, during the sudden rainfall, or during precipitation. During the night time, this water expanded. The expansion of the water during the night time increases the volume of the water by 10%, and as a result, to occupy the ice which is present, this water gets freezed to this crack expands. During the daytime, again the water melts, ice melts away. So the rock alternate freeze, alternate thaw, alternate freeze, this results into expansion of this crack, ultimately leading into the disintegration. Such kind of a disintegration is known as block disintegration of the rock. So it is a kind of an block disintegration of the rocks, is kind of the, we can say, it is a kind of an weathering. It is a kind of a weathering which occurs due to freeze and thaw action of a river, of a water. Due to freeze and thaw action of water especially in the temperate regions, this alternate freezing alternate freezing and thawing of the water, what it will do? It will expand the crack. Alternate freezing freeze and thaw. It will set up stress in the rocks, ultimately resulting into disintegration of the rocks. Ultimately resulting into disintegration of rocks. So this is an example of an such kind of block disintegration due to the frost action is also known as, it is also known as see this spelling, Conley fraction. It is also known as Conley fraction. It is also known as Conley fraction. Can everyone see it? So, what is Conley fraction? It is the block disintegration due to frost action. Where it will be common? It will be common in the higher latitudes, not in the lower latitudes. That is not in the tropical regions. It will be present in the higher latitudes. By higher latitudes means 30° north and above. That is 35 degree north and above. That is, as you go away from the equator towards the pole, you are going into the higher latitude. In those regions, especially in the winter regions, this will occur. That is the freeze and thaw action of the water. Okay, so have a look at this before I rub. The freeze and thaw, block disintegration. Why it is known as block disintegration? Because big blocks of the rock break here. Now this block disintegration need not necessarily be confined only to the frost action, that is due in the temperate latitudes. It can also occur in the lower latitudes in the desert region due to the alternate expansion and contraction of the outer layers of the rock due to heat of the or due to insolation. So we are doing the next topic, that is the block disintegration due to the temperature changes in the rock. That is the block disintegration due to temperature changes. So this outer layers of the rocks, now due to temperature changes in the areas which receive very heavy amount of insolation, we can say that if this is the rock, the outer layers of the rock will receive very high amount of insolation during the daytime. As a result, only the outer layers of the rock get heated up as compared to the inner layers of the rock. Why? Because these outer layers of the rock are expanded during the daytime and they become cool and contract during the night time, and as a result there is alternate expansion contraction only generally affecting the outer layers of the rock. As a result, the rocks starts cracking, or there is a stress which is set up in the rocks. This stress results into cracking of the rocks along the joints or along the stress which is set up. So these joints may expand, resulting into ultimate breaking down of the rocks into different types of blocks. So the rocks may further break down into different types of blocks. How it is different from the earlier, that is block disintegration due to the frost action. Now here it occurs in the areas of very, very high amount of insolation. So this will occur in the areas in which there is heavy amount of sunlight. So it will occur, it is a kind of a weathering in the hot regions or in the desert regions. So we can say it is a weathering in hot desert regions. What happens in the hot desert regions? During daytime, high amount of insolation, and therefore outer layers of the rocks expand, while in the desert layers during the night time there is a sudden fall of temperature because it does not have a cloud cover, while they contract during the night time. This result into stress due to differential expansion and contraction. The word is stress due to differential expansion and contraction of the rocks. Ultimately resulting into disintegration of the rocks. Ultimately resulting into disintegration of the rocks. So the kind of a block, this is a kind of a block disintegration due to temperature changes in the hot desert region, due to the frost action in the temperate latitude regions. Now the third kind of a disintegration, mechanical weathering, is granular disintegration of rocks. Now imagine this kind of a rock structure on the surface, which is having, for example, granite or any kind of a rock structure which is having grains of different sizes and different colors. Now suppose this is an kind of a grain which is having black color grains, it is having some red color grains or crystals. Some are blue color crystals. Now obviously which kind of a crystal will take up maximum amount of sunlight, whether it will be black, blue, white, red. In this diagram it will be obviously black color crystal which will absorb maximum amount of sunlight, as compared to the darker the color, the more absorption of a sunlight, and as a result in the same rock different amount of sunlight will be absorbed because they are made up of different type of crystal, different type of grains, and as a result different size of the grains will expand, different grains will expand at a different rate. The darker the grain, it will expand at much faster rate as compared to the other kind of a grain which will expand at a slower rate. As a result, alternate expansion, contraction, again you remember in weathering, it is all based, physical weathering is all based on one word, differential expansion and contraction. That means the different rate of expansion and contraction of outer layers of different grains, of different types of rocks, of different minerals in the same kind of a rock, resulting into breaking. Put sudden water, hot water inside in a cold glass, it will break. Why? Because the alternate expansion and contraction, or sudden expansion and contraction. Hot glass, the hot water, if it suddenly expands, resulting into breaking up of this. Now in this region, in this rocks, in the first diagram, the rock is made up of different type of crystals. As a result, the darker crystals will absorb more amount of insolation, and as a result the rock will break down into different kind of granules. That is, the darker granules will ultimately fall off from the rock, resulting into formation of a granular, what we say, mostly the darker granules will form at the base of the rock, and we will see that rock will be made up of some lighter granules may also fall off, but mostly it will be darker granules. So we will see that the rock is generally now made up of only light colored granules, while the darker granules will fall off due to alternate expansion and the contraction of the rock, resulting into, it will look as if someone has pierced the rock, made holes in the rock. Such kind of a disintegration is known as granular disintegration of a rock. So the third kind of a type of a physical disintegration is granular disintegration. So the granular disintegration occurs in the what kind of a rock? It will occur in well-jointed rock or in crystalline rock. What is this? It will occur in the crystalline rocks. So we can say the granular disintegration occurs in the coarse-grained crystalline rocks. Occurs in coarse-grained crystalline rocks. Why does it occur? Because the darker color crystals absorb more amount of insolation causing stresses in the rock and ultimately disintegrate from the rock. They disintegrate. Ultimately, they disintegrate as granules. They ultimately disintegrate as granules. So granular disintegration due to differential, again rate of absorption of insolation by different colored crystals. By different colored crystals in the rock. So this is the granular disintegration. So you have to, what you have to remember, it occurs only in which kind of a rock? It will occur in the crystalline rocks of the world. Why? Because the darker the color crystals and the lighter color crystals, they will behave differently in the terms of absorption of crystals. The darker color crystal absorb more insolation. What is insolation? Amount of sunlight. As a result, while the lighter color crystal will absorb less amount of insolation or sunlight, as a result there will be alternate different type of expansion in the same colored rock. As a result, the stress will be set up in the rock. Ultimately, the darker color crystals will fall out, resulting into the granular disintegration of the rocks. Now, the fourth kind of a physical weathering is weathering and mass movement. Now we are coming to the next part of geography, that is, now we are coming to a part of geography which in the Earth's movement, if you remember the lecture of the Earth's movement, we talked about internal landform, that is endogenetic process. We talked about the exogenetic process. We finished the endogenetic process such as plate tectonics, earthquake, volcanoes, and we also did the next part, which is rocks. Now we are coming to the exogenetic processes, the processes which apply from outside, and what are the changes they make in the landform. So this is a part of your syllabus in which there is changes into the landform according to the changing due to different external erosions according to the time period. So no landform is stable. Initially, earth flat, mountain rises upwards, then to maintain the equilibrium on the earth, the exogenetic forces try to bring down the mountain up to a grand level, base level, which is known as the sea level. Sea level is the grand base level for all the processes on the earth. Now, the exogenetic process, it is similar to like company rises upwards, it enjoys its peak period, then it has to come down. The same thing, endogenetic forces will make the land upwards, they will rise the land, they will apply the forces to make the different kind of landforms such as mountains, such as rift valleys, and then the exogenetic process will try to decrease the amount of land. The exogenetic processes are of two types. They are known as weathering and denudation, and now we are starting with the exogenetic process which is known as weathering. So they come in the kind of a landform which is known as denudation or erosion. So what do this exogenetic process? This exogenetic processes, you have to remember, they reduce or they try to bring the landform back to the grand base level. So there is a constant competition going on between, we can say, exogenetic process and the endogenetic process. The exogenetic process try to internal process, right, to raise the land, while the exogenetic process, that is the external process, try to bring down are working vigorously to bring down the landform levels. So the processes are exogenetic process or external forces, now this try to, they wear out the land and try to bring down the land to grand base level, or in simple words, this is the geographical word, that they try to bring down the land to the ground base level, but in the simple words, we can say that they try to erode or they try to wear away the land, try to bring down the land to sea level. Sorry. That is this. So we have different kind of features on the surface of the earth. So some flat regions, some plateau regions, and some plain regions. And on then so the work of the exogenetic forces will to bring down this entire land to this grand base level, that is to the sea level. So the exogenetic process, what we can say, they cause the general lowering of the surface of the earth. We can say they lower the surface of the earth, and this process is known as denudation. This entire process is known as denudation. Then what is the denudation? Denudation is lowering of the surface of the earth. The denudation is further divided into two types, basically, mostly generally into two types. Some books may be dividing them into three types, but it is mostly divided. Some may be having it into three types, but here it is mostly divided into two major types, that is weathering and the second type is erosion. Weathering and erosion. So the denudation is of two types, weathering and erosion. Now take for example, if this glass of water, if there is a sudden change in the temperature and this glass of water breaks and the particles of glass fall on the floor without any external agent, that is, it breaks automatically, or maybe it is breaking because I am pressing this glass and I am breaking this glass and it is breaking and I am letting the particles of the glass lie on the floor itself. Then such a process, the particles of the glass will lie on the floor till the time nobody removes it or somebody else removes it or I remove it. So in the real life also, when the rock particles break and there is no large scale transportation of the rock particles, or there is no movement of the rock particles, when they break, disintegrate, decompose in situ or at the same place and lie there at the same place, such a process is known as weathering. On the other hand, erosion involves transportation and deposition, that is, I am breaking this glass, then I am taking the broom. Broom is one of the agent of transportation, so I am taking the broom and removing the glass particles and depositing it in the safe place or maybe in the dustbin. Come to the real life example. Breaking of the rocks occur, then the agent of transportation comes. It may be river, it may be ice, it may be wind. It takes away those sediments, it takes away the dust particles and deposits it somewhere, maybe into the sea, because river finally goes and meets the sea. Such kind of an denudation in which there is breaking due to the external agent. When there is a large scale transportation and deposition, it is known as erosion. So what is the basic difference? Weathering is in situ method. In situ means at the same place, while erosion is ex situ, that is, erosion can occur there because there is a transportation and deposition, it does not remain at the same place. So what is weathering? Gradual disintegration of the rocks in the same place is weathering. Erosion is wearing away of the rocks or disintegration of the rocks by the agents of erosion. Why the agent of erosion? Because water is coming, it is eroding the rock, and also at the same time it is taking away the sediments. Transportation, obviously the moving of the sediments by some kind of agent of sedimentation, and then deposition. So in erosion there is a transportation, in erosion there is a deposition, but in weathering there is no movement except under the force of gravity. What do you mean by under the force of gravity? If this is a flat land surface and if the rock particles break on this flat land surface, they will lie here. But on the other hand, if this is a sloping land surface and if the rock particles break, they will fall down because of the influence of a gravity. Such a movement which there is a influence of a gravity is involved, no other agent except for some kind of a water, some kind of a rainwater, some kind of a water, because water is a universal agent, we cannot exclude water. So such kind of a movement in which there is a physical, gradually, slowly the rocks disintegrate and there is no agent of transportation, so they lie there and travel only under the influence of gravity, is known as weathering. So our topic now is weathering and mass movement. So what is a weathering? Physical disintegration or chemical decomposition. So I am using the two different words, physical disintegration or chemical decomposition of the rocks at the same place, that is in situ, can be defined as a weathering. So weathering is a process in which there is a gradual disintegration of a rocks at the same place without any large scale transportation of the weathered away material. So you can take the definition of a weathering as, in fact, you try to jot down some of the important points, try to make some of the important points from the lecture, take down the notes in the lecture, then only you will be able to use this lecture to the best possible way. That is why in some areas I am going very slow, that is why somewhere I am writing down the important points. The idea or the rationale behind this is that you should not note down or you should jot down these points and keep it in your mind. So what is a weathering? Weathering involves, or we can say, weathering refers to breakdown or disintegration and decomposition of the rocks in situ. So how can we define weathering? It is a process in which there is disintegration, or we can say disintegration, that is breakdown, and decomposition of rocks in situ. In situ, that is, there is a breakdown of the rocks in situ, that is, they lie at the same place. So there is a process in which there is a disintegration, breakdown and decomposition of the rocks in situ without any large scale transportation, without transportation. Now here, except under the influence of gravity. Except under the influence of gravity. So that means it is a very boring process, can we say, because there is no transportation. You are breaking down, you are lying at the same place. You don't know where to go. That means, that is why in geography this process is known as static process. Static means the rocks break down and lie there. They do not move without their under the influence of gravity. That means if they are under the slope, then only they will move. If they are not on the slope, they will keep lying there, break down further, mix into the soil, result into formation of one more layer of a soil. So weathering is a process in which there is we are not defining here mass movement, we are defining only the weathering. So weathering is a process in which there is a disintegration, that is physical breakdown, or decomposition, that is a chemical breakdown of the rocks in situ. That is, there is or we can say there is a denudation of the rocks in situ. There is no transportation under the influence of gravity. So you remember, in the weathering, again I am repeating, in situ breakdown of the rocks. Therefore, it is a static process. It is static process. It is we can say, a static process in which there is no movement of the rocks, in which there is no kind of transportation of the rocks involved.